Actually, just maybe I got to do that one more time. I wasn't recording there. Good afternoon. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to be recreating another painting by another one of my favorite artists. And we're continuing to look at some of Ukraine's greatest artists of all time. And today we're going to look at the greatest living Ukrainian artist. I had this all queued up here. So today we're going to be looking at Anatoliy Kryvolap's artwork, and this is the painting that we are going to attempt to recreate. This is a painting of a horse. It's entitled Horse White Knight from 2008, and it is very similar to one called Horse Knight, which was painted, I think, the year after. That sold for $138,000 American in 2013, making Kryvolap the most successful artist financially, the most expensive artist of Ukrainian descent, at least living artist of all time. I guess we could argue maybe Malevich or Delaunay might have surpassed him, but they died over 100 years ago, or around 100 years ago. So he's certainly the most successful in terms of sales of any Ukrainian artist alive. And considering what's going on in the world right now, one hopes that he and his family, as well as everyone else in Ukraine, is okay. So let's take a look at the plan for today's episode. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going to get the image onto the canvas, and I've already done the outline. I'm going to show you how to do that. Then we're going to put some paint on the canvas to get started. We're going to stain it with a little bit of yellow. We'll talk all about that and the different kinds of paints, the actual paint that we're going to use today that I suggest. Of course, you can use anything else. We're going to talk about Kryvolap's biography, potentially do a little bit of underpainting, and then we're going to progress through a few different steps back and forth between foreground and background. Although today's painting may be a little bit less complex than certainly some of the other ones, like the Kramer from Seinfeld that we did for April Fool's just a few days ago, which had a lot of back and forth, right? And then so I would say probably about an hour and a half from now we should be looking at wrapping up, and so if you can always just jump right to the very end, see what it looks like, and if this is something you want to pursue, you're welcome to come right back here and pick up where you left off. As always, if you want to support the channel, just like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, because I often do videos kind of out of the blue, so you want to make sure that you know what those are. And if you want to support the channel, there's some links in the description for different ways you can give as little as $1 to help keep the show going. Okay, so let's talk about getting the image onto the canvas here. Now I'm going to play a video that just shows this process. And essentially, there is a Dropbox folder in the description below. You'll see a link for that. In fact, let's just take a look. And in this Dropbox folder, you're going to see a whole bunch of files. All the very intro stuff is at the very beginning. If you're brand new to painting, this is the first time you've ever painted, here's a bunch of resources, as well as the videos that complement it. As well as these top ones are relatively straightforward, easy paintings for a beginner to do. Right? You could see we did some Matisse, Paul Klee, Sonia Delaunay, another Ukrainian artist. And then here's some other Ukrainian artists that we're going to be tackling shortly. As well as the next 150 plus folders here are paintings we've already done. And these are a little bit more complex, maybe a little bit more towards between beginner and intermediate. Some of them are maybe even more advanced than that, but most of the time I'm trying to make sure everything is within grasp of even a beginner painter. And you can see there's tons of stuff. I mean, you got, I don't know, there's probably 10 or more different Van Gogh episodes and Picasso episodes. You know, some of the more familiar artists that you might know of in Walt Disney, etc. And also, I just want to show, since we're talking about Ukrainian artists today, we started last week Timofey Boychuk is, or was, him and his brother were two very, very famous Ukrainian artists. And then starting this week, we're going to be looking at, for the next 2 weeks, 4 Ukrainian artists, as well as we'll keep on going down the list. And yeah, tons of different stuff there. I decided I'd point that out. And I also just want to remind you, if you're watching for the first time, is to join the Facebook group. We just crossed over 300 members of our community just the other day. And it's a fantastic group of people who might be just like you, just either beginning their journey or just getting that journey going. And some people have been painting with me for 2 years now, and the development is awesome and it's super exciting. So if you want to get inspired by the achievements of other people and to support them and to have your achievements supported, I encourage you to join the group. Here's a great new paint. I haven't looked at this here. Great job, Joshua. Awesome. So here's the Boychuk painting we made just the other day. Okay, so once you go to, where is this folder? Is right up here, 000. You're going to see 3 files in here, and those 3 files correspond to the original image and then a JPEG and PDF version of the outline. So let's just take a look at that. So there's the outline, and then there's the original, right? And it's all free. You don't have to contribute any money if you don't want to. So let's show you how to get that onto a canvas. I'm going to play this video and then talk over top of it while it unfolds here. So as I said, I printed this off on my inkjet printer, and I'm going to use a 9x12 sized canvas board, which I've also gessoed. Even though it comes pre-gessoed, I gessoed it again and then sanded it so it'd be nice and extra smooth. And then I'm just going to take some tape and tape down this printout. Again, I just use my regular printer at home. It doesn't have to be anything special. You know, my inkjet printer. You could use a LaserJet printer. You could use your printer at work or at a photocopy place down the street. And then I'm using some carbon paper, and you can see that carbon paper has been well used, right? So you can get maybe a dozen or more of these tracings done on the same piece of carbon paper or graphite paper. And then I'm going to go through this, kind of skip ahead a little bit because it's pretty straightforward. I didn't do every single line. You'll see here shortly that there's a few lines that I didn't bother doing. Whoa, that's Thursday's episode. Where's this? Okay. Well, it's not going, so let's just continue here. So, usually, okay, so there it's gonna, well, no, it stopped. Okay. So, once you've got that done, you'll have the outline on here. Now, again, I said I didn't do all of the lines, maybe not quite the halo. The interesting thing is the back legs on this particular painting were a little bit obscured for me personally. So, I'll just sort of look at that again real quick here, so you can just see. I just sort of, it's like what exactly are where those things go, so we can use our imagination and kind of fill in the blanks a little bit, which is what I try to do. And when we get to that part of the painting, you can either try to clarify it, or you can leave it a little bit ambiguous. And I think that's a big part of Kryvolap's paint, especially this painting. Some of his other ones maybe are a little bit more articulated than this one, but I think part of the idea for these horses is that they are sort of a little bit ambiguous. We're not sure whether they're, kind of coming or going in terms of like this fog that's rolling in. And the painting that sold for $38,000 about a decade ago is almost entirely dark blue and black. So the horse is almost totally invisible. And so rather than doing that painting, which you could still do, I decided to do this one because it's a little bit more visible. Okay. Oh, and I saw Lisa just left a $10 donation through the super chat. Thank you. It says, I enjoy your channel immensely. Thank you. Thank you. That's so sweet of you, Lisa. Okay, so now that we've got the outline on the canvas, I'll just move this out of the way. And let's start getting some paint on the canvas. So really the first step that I usually do is apply what's called an Imprimatura. The Imprimatura, which is a really fun word to say. It's an Italian word that goes all the way back to pre-Renaissance times. And it really essentially means like the first coat of paint, or the first paint, first brush stroke. And there's many different ways to think about this. I usually just think about it as like staining the canvas, because that's what artists have been doing since the times of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Raphael. So it's actually used as a time-saving exercise, and most of the time artists would use a kind of a rusty brown color. I use this warm yellow, which is very atypical. Most people don't do this. But just for especially for our beginner classes, I think this is a great way just to get the painting off and running as quickly as possible without having to spend the first few minutes figuring out how to mix any colors. So I just squeeze some of this paint out. Oh, you know what? I should tell you what kind of paint I'm using here, right? That might be helpful. So the color I just squeezed out of here is this Azo Yellow Deep, and it's by this brand Amsterdam, and they're a subsidiary of Royal Talens, which is a Dutch company. And I'm going to use I'm going to use 7 tubes of paint. I often don't use this the black. In fact, I may not even use all 7 colors. I'm definitely going to use some white. And let me think about. We'll take a look at the colors here. But you don't have to use this brand. There's lots of other kinds of brands that you can use, including Golden. If you want a much higher quality paint, here's Golden, and these are the colors that are roughly approximate what I'm about to use. Liquitex also makes some more expensive paints, and this is their cheaper brand. Winsor & Newton, they're mostly an oil paint company, but they also make some acrylics. Artist Loft, they're the Michael's Art Supply chain, their proprietary brand. Buzz Art Supplies, Peebo, Holbein, Daler-Rowney. Again, all this information is in the very first episode of of this Master Study series. It's in the playlist below, so you can always just, if you want, you can just pause these, do a screenshot, or just go watch those episodes, and you can I show videos and photographs of all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'm putting this, what I call a warm yellow, on here, and I'm going to put a bit of water. Maybe just a little bit more. You know, it's probably like 3-to-1 water. And this is the only time I ever put water in my paint. Just give it a nice good stir. Now, I'm not sure if Kryvolap does this kind of thing. I've been doing my best over the past few weeks to do as much research on him as possible. Obviously, trying to get in contact with anyone in Ukraine right now is impossible and sort of unseemly to try to... certainly, Anatoliy and his family have other things on their minds at the moment. So I would be very surprised if he'd used this type of a technique in his art, but I'll show you some clips here when we take a look at his biography of him painting, and you know, he uses lots of paint. Some of them are actually quite thick, so sometimes if you're doing really, really thick painting, depending on how you apply the paint, the entire surface is just so covered in thick paint that you would probably not even see your Imprimatura at all. So in that case, you could even just skip this step. Okay, that looks pretty good. And when I'm done, I just like to wipe my brush off before I put it into the water so that my water doesn't instantly change, you know, I mean, it turns yellow, but, you know, I won't have to change my water at all during the entire episode. And I know because one of the things when I teach classes in person, there's sometimes a couple of people who every 5 or 6 minutes are getting up and changing their water because they think it's dirty. And it might be a little bit dirty, but this is a way to save yourself a little bit of time. Okay. So, we're going to take a look at his biography here in a second. I just thought I would just show a few things. I've been on a whole, over the past few months, or month, little personal investigation into Ukraine and Ukrainian history, as well as some of the great authors in Ukrainian history. And just as a quick little, I just want to share, I've been reading Gogol, or Google, I keep thinking of Google. Nikolai Gogol is probably one of the most respected Ukrainian authors of all time, often co-opted by Russia as a great Russian author, but he was born in Ukraine, spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and also sort of wrote a lot about Ukrainian folk tales, often for a Russian audience. But this is a great book if you're looking to kind of you want to read a little bit more about Ukrainian authors. And this is also the best translation. I took a number of other books of his out from the library, and I was like, oh, maybe this guy's not as good as everyone says. And then I read the same stories in this book, and they're way better. So of a couple that I would recommend are The Overcoat. The Overcoat, that's really good. The Nose, that's really wild. And Diary of a Madman. Those are all, the Petersburg tales. These are the ones he wrote when he moved to, I think he wrote most of these when he was in Russia, especially these Ukrainian tales. I think he wrote when he was in Russia about his time, or kind of folk tales he heard growing up. But these are wild, like Diary of a Madman. If someone told you that was written today or yesterday, you'd be like, yeah, that seems like a very contemporary story of a guy going crazy who's convinced that he's the king of Spain. Very, very wild, right? And then, so here's another, we're going to actually make paintings by this artist very shortly. Taras Shevchenko is considered to be sort of the Shakespeare of Ukraine, maybe. I don't know if anyone's ever said that before, but he's like the main prize for art and culture in Ukraine is the Taras Shevchenko National Award, and he not only was a painter, he did some paintings which are pretty incredible, but is mostly known for his poetry and literature, mostly his poetry. So I haven't actually read this yet, but in preparation for next week's episode. And then I thought I would just also mention, just really quickly, Ivan Franko, who might be one of the most beloved Ukrainian authors of all time. I'm not doing an episode related to him, but there's in every Ukrainian city, there's an Ivan Franko boulevard, street, etc. And like the Ivan Franko Society here in Canada is really one of the gathering places right now to help support Ukrainian people and refugees. And then this is a book I've just been reading, which is like the kind of the history of Ukraine through 41 different maps, and it is wild. Like I know maybe more about contemporary Ukrainian history than I really care to know, because a lot of it is quite negative, the recent stuff. But I'm not too familiar with the deep older history of Ukraine, and learning about it has been really fascinating. And I gotta say, I have a little bit of there's a lot of inner conflict within me these days. Of it's sort of taken a war for me to start really exploring my own personal family history, but I guess never too late. And part of doing these episodes focusing on Ukrainian artists is not only a way for me to help myself learn about my own culture, but also because, you know, Vladimir Putin's stated goal is essentially to prove that Ukraine is a country that doesn't exist. Its people don't really exist. They're essentially Ukrainian or Russian people, and therefore whatever quote-unquote Ukrainian culture is ripe for just being obliterated. And sadly, the artist we're going to talk about on Thursday, the museum that used to house all of her work, was destroyed by Russian troops. So, yeah, okay. I'm not going to get emotional, so I'll stay on track. So, let's talk about the history. Let's talk about the biography of Anatoliy Kryvolap, and sort of just take there's not a lot in English that I could find, so we'll see what we can do here. I should mention right off the top, he's got his own website, and you can buy art directly from him, and there's lots of images of his work. I love these photos. He's often wearing sunglasses. And you can see, like, some of these paintings are quite thick. These are all details. In fact, maybe it's worth just sort of looking at these sort of Google images of his work here, because I think it gives us a much faster idea of the type of work that he's known for, which are often landscapes and usually rural countrysides throughout Ukraine with these big skies, and often these sort of sunset type of imagery, right? These pink skies and yellow skies, deep blue skies, like the sun is just set, and purple, and everything is in a silhouette, because this is sort of probably what a lot of, you know, if you're in that hot summer day in the middle of a scorching field, this is something that at least comes to my mind when I think of, that just deep summer heat. It kind of almost looks like an infrared photograph. But I just love these super hyper saturated colors that he plays with. Where are some other ones? Right, there's sometimes some animals. I like this painting a lot too. This figure. His painting also sort of verges on abstraction as well. So there's some that look maybe like totally abstract paintings, or what we might call non-representational or non-objective paintings. But for the most part, there's sort of the appearance of like a horizon line and maybe a little bit of light, sometimes like a building or a house or a horse kind of passing by. It gives you an idea of the scale of some of these. Some of them are much larger, right? You can see here's a video of him doing a painting where he's got this big bowl and he's painting on top of it. And I'm not going to play the video. It shows him actually just squeezing paint right out of tubes onto the canvas and then spreading it around with a palette knife. Here's a video from just last year, and you can see this is what he looks like today. Here's some other interviews where he's standing in front of some of his work. A lot of these interviews are in Ukrainian, and I don't speak Ukrainian, so I wasn't able to translate them. And the Google Translate was so bad that quite laughable. If you want a little bit of a laugh, is to try to because it's just total nonsense. Like I'm like, I'm sure that's not what he's saying. What else do I want to mention here? So, you know what, maybe I'm actually going to look at the Facebook page here, because I spent time putting together the biography And so we can sort of just look at my notes. This is essentially some, yeah. So, he was born in this small town right outside of Kyiv, and just sort of southeast of Kyiv. And I don't really know too much about his youth. I'm sure there's some information in Ukrainian about it, but I wasn't able to find it. He later studies at the very same school that was established by Mikhailo Boychuk in 1917, right? So in that episode we did on Timofey or Timko Boychuk, we talked a lot about Mikhailo's life, because that plays a big part in his younger brother's life. But he founded this very important art school in Kyiv, and I think it's just it's interesting that we're now talking about an artist that 100 years later attended that very same school. Upon graduating, we talked a lot about the kind of work he was making, and one of the things that he's chosen to really focus on these kind of landscapes that are mostly empty. They're not cityscapes. There's not like cars and trains and buses and airplanes moving through them, because he wanted a much more contemplative kind of experience with painting, something that would contrast with the chaos of contemporary city life. And you can almost see a little bit of like a nod to Rothko in some of the work, considering we just did a Rothko painting just a few days, or a couple weeks ago, that many people have said looks a lot like the Ukrainian flag. So after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, him and a number of his peers formed this group called the Painterly Preserve, and I found another translation, the Picturesque Reserve. But essentially that group, their goal, a lot of them were also kind of semi-abstract painters, but one of their main focuses was bringing attention back to artists like the Boychuk brothers, who died during Stalin's many purges. Because Mikhailo Boychuk was part of this group that is now referred to as the Executed Renaissance, this group of avant-garde Ukrainian artists from the 1920s and 30s who were all executed or deported to Siberia and died in the various concentration work camps that were there. So it's not a surprise that as soon as the Soviet Union fell, you have a bunch of contemporary artists like Kryvolap who decide, like, now that we're not going to get thrown in jail or murdered for talking about these people, there's an urgency to go and collect that information and bring it back out into the world so people know who these artists were, because in some cases, some of them still had, widows or children that were getting older and were maybe soon to pass away, so their stories had to be captured. So I just think that's, every time I think about what's happening in Ukraine right now, I just think about my own life, my own experience, and what would happen if this was going on here in Canada or here in Vancouver, where I am currently. I don't mean to be a bummer, but, the news just yesterday is that parents in Ukraine are writing the names of their children and their medical conditions, etc., with Sharpies on their children's bodies, so that if something were to happen to the parents and the children are found wandering the streets by themselves, that there would at least be some information to anyway, let's keep things positive. But we have to kind of also remember that we're doing this in light of this global catastrophe. Okay, so let's get some. Do I want to talk about? Oh, I think he's got an Instagram page too. I'm gonna follow that. I don't know. And let me see. I'm gonna put that up on the screen. There's only 3 posts on here. And let's see. That is Anatoliy Kryvolap, at Anatoliy Kryvolap. Let's see if there's any other images in this article worth talking about. Right, like this kind of looks like what we'll talk about Kazimir Malevich in a couple of weeks, and that kind of looks a lot like one of his paintings. Like, isn't it? These are just like the. Do you not? I don't know. I just see when I look at painting like this, I feel like the heat waves coming off. You know, as the sun goes down. So here's another one of the horses, right? You could see how barely visible those horses actually are. Right, that's not today's. This is today's. This is the one, oh no, that's not the one that sold for 100, but it's very similar. I guess they don't have an image of it. Okay, so let's get to the painting. Okay. So usually at this stage, what we do is start applying what's called an underpainting. And an underpainting is, you know, is a contested term. Let's just be frank about that. There's different ideas of what underpainting can mean. For some artists, the underpainting might mean sort of that first layer of paint all over where you're blocking in color shapes. And I've used that term for that particular kind of approach in the past, so sorry for any confusion. But as I've sort of been trying to kind of use maybe more, trying to get my words straight, is an alternate definition is really the painting of lines that an artist might use to establish the composition of a painting. So in a painting like this, you know, it's entirely possible that Kryvolap might have begun the painting with some paint and literally just outlined the shape and then started to apply things, other colors around it. So I'm not exactly sure how he began the painting, but I don't really feel like I need to do anything like that, because I think we can just literally start putting in the background and then we'll do the foreground as a separate pass here. So let's do just that. Let's start by mixing the color for our background, and then we'll paint that in, and that'll, because this image is fairly straightforward, not too complex, we'll then paint the inside, and then probably do a little bit of tinkering back on the background, finish with our foreground, right? Okay, so that's still a little bit wet. While that gets an extra couple seconds to dry, let's get some paint on the palette here, and I didn't put my labels on here yet. I'm missing my cold blue label. Okay, but so maybe let's put the cold blue on here right away. Or actually, you know what? Before I start squeezing all of the colors out, maybe we should just take a look and see what colors we might in fact need. Because this painting is mostly purple, and I think, you know, it's hard to say. I think we could do you know, okay, so what I think the colors that we're going to need, because we're going to want to make a purple, and I think we want to try to make a more saturated purple. So we're going to need our warm red, I think we're basically going to need almost all the colors on here, oddly enough, now that I start thinking about it. So I'm going to maybe put maybe less of some colors. It looks like I'm going to have to open a new tube of that. I got any? So this is exactly what was just in that tube. I'm just going to mix a little bit of my darkest color, just so that I can have a little bit of that flexibility to darken my purple if I want to. That's a lot. So to make a really nice saturated purple, we're going to want to use our warm blue and our cool red. And this color's a little bit more on the purple, or on the blue side of purple. So just we'll keep that in mind when we get to mixing. And I'm also going to use just a little bit of my cool yellow. I think the only color I'm not really going to need is my warm yellow. We put that down on the canvas to start, so... Okay. I know, it's like, really, do we need all these colors? Maybe. Maybe not. If we don't, as I mentioned before, one of the things I do is, I use scrap paint. I put it on top of my J. DeFeo painting. J. DeFeo was one of the great American artists, abstract painters, and she made a gigantic painting just like this called The Rose. And it was so big and it was so heavy, so thick, full of paint that they had to take the wall off of her apartment by her window and to use a crane to get it out. I think it weighed over a couple of tons of paint. So let's mix some purple here. Okay, so I'm going to start out, I'm going to get a little bit of my cool red. And here's my warm blue. I'm going to take most of this. Let's mix that together. So that's still very bluish. Let's take a bit more warm red. And I think we're pretty close. Now you're going to say, well, that's really dark. Absolutely, totally, I agree. So we don't want to paint this color here. We're going to want to add some white to this color. And we may not need very much of this purple because the resulting color that we're actually going to be painting with is primarily white, right? So in fact, maybe just the paint that I have on the brush here might be enough. We'll see. I'm going to get as much off as possible. And I'm just going to actually literally wipe my brush because it's going to be a lot easier to add purple to my white than it is to take, you know, if I wanted to lighten this up, I'm going to need to use that whole white tube of paint, right? I'm not going to bother washing the brush, but let's do this right here. Okay. I wonder if I should actually do the... Well, let's see. Let's just take some of this purple. We're pretty close right there, right? That kind of looks like the color of the inside of the positive shape of the horse itself. Now, I think it's pretty close. What I'm going to do, though, is add a little bit of matte medium into this paint. And that's going to thin this paint out substantially. It's going to make it way more transparent. Because I might want to build up a few layers of paint here, rather than just, you know, do one quick one. Like, if I want, we could be done in maybe 15 minutes if I really, really wanted to go, because I could paint that right in where the horse actually is. But, you know, I really want to sort of show how we can really learn some really important painting skills beyond just sort of getting it done as quickly as possible. So I'm actually going to quickly blow dry this because there's still a little bit of paint that's still wet, so I'm going to mute the microphone for a moment. Okay. So I'm going to take this. Now, what's going to happen likely is I'm going to see some of this yellow come through because I put that matte medium in. And that means I'm probably going to do 2 coats of this. And so the question will be, why even bother? Like, I mean, why not just do 1 thick coat and be done with it? And as we've talked about a number of times, it's like the difference between you know, almost, it's like I made the analogy of like a croissant and the various folds in the dough. You know, another way of thinking about it might be like, you know, the difference between making your own pasta versus using pre-made pasta. You know, you're just going to get a kind of a deeper, richer, more complex result. Okay. So I'm not sure how that looks to you, but it does look kind of patchy. Right, so we're going to let that dry. And if anything, I'm going to let's mix the other one. Looks like I may not need to use my yellow and red and blue after all, I think. So let's take some more white. I'm going to do this right over here. I'm going to take more of my background. So we're going to paint the background in. So maybe we'll go quicker than I thought. I don't know. I always hesitate to say anything because sometimes I'm here 5 hours later and I think, how on earth did I get here? Let's put a bit more in. So this is darker. I have more pigment in there, less white. The only thing that worries me is that in fact, I'm actually going to put a little bit more white in here, which is going to make it look not too dissimilar from the foreground. The reason why is if I paint purple directly over top of this yellow, and it's kind of transparent, it's very possible that I might get a really dark brown appear and not a purple. And I want a little bit of this yellow to come through, but I want it to come through as yellow and not mix entirely with the purple. So that's why I added just a little bit more yellow. Kind of just what's nice is I'm working on this canvas that I put that gesso on, so it's nice and smooth, and the paint just goes on just like butter. Ooh, just it's so satisfying. I'm also not at all concerned about the streaks and where it kind of we might have kind of like little blotchy areas. I think that actually kind of works in my favor in terms of Kryvolap's style. So we'll blow dry this, and then we'll just repeat, rinse and repeat, right? Okay. Okay, let's just take a look at these colors here. So it's interesting. I feel like, you know, on this side, it needs to get darker. This side might be okay, or maybe need to lighten up a little bit. The horse itself could almost go a little bit darker. One thing that is a little bit confusing is this darker outline, right? And so that darker outline is a little bit hard to overcome when it comes to like mixing colors, because it sort of makes, depending on what you're looking at, the contrast greater between each one of these. So I think when we get that outline in, it could sort of change things for myself or some of you watching, where you think like, oh, now that I got that outline in there, I feel like maybe my horse is too dark or too light. Like, oh, I totally understand. So just before just so you know, that type of thing happens all of the time. Okay, let's I kind of jumped around. So essentially what we just did was our first pass of the background and maybe a little foreground. Let's do another pass on the horse and the background, and we'll see where we're at after that. Okay, so let's see. Oops, we want... Maybe I'll take my brush into this white. Again, I'm almost... Actually, this is okay. For a second there, I thought maybe this is too much white in this paint. But I can still see a little bit of that yellow coming through. I'm also not worried about over-painting my edges at all, like going over the, because that's a big part of it, right? That this sort of little bit of ambiguity between what is the horse, what is the space around it, and we can shape it with that outline afterwards. That's why I'm still using a pretty big brush. Okay, that's not bad. It's possible that I may do another coat of this afterwards, so we'll just see. And I might even use a slightly smaller brush for that, just to kind of get a little bit more nuance. So let's go into the background here. And maybe I'll take some of this white, and I'm just going to actually mix it on the canvas. So I took some of the color I painted this with previously and a little bit of that, so that we'll get a little bit of the paint mixing together on the canvas. As opposed to doing it all on the palette, because you just get a very different kind of a look. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to take some of my lighter color and my darker color. Let's do the same thing again, because it really kind of creates a neat little effect of the mixing paint on the palette, or on the canvas rather than the palette. And this sort of mixing paint directly onto the actual painting itself is a technique that a lot of artists used, you know, at the turn of the last century. This is quite a popular kind of approach, because it was, you know, it was just totally different than the academic approach to painting. And we've talked a lot about, you know, artists around the turn of the last century were doing everything they could to kind of rebel against the you know, the way things were done. And Kryvolap, again, being an artist who's really interested in preserving the knowledge of and the legacy of all of those Ukrainian artists who were murdered by Stalin. You know, I think part of his process is really to embrace those techniques of the artists of the past. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to do a little bit, I think maybe a little bit more of that, but darkening a few areas down, because I think I've got it okay, but down here we're going to need to darken, maybe even lighten a little bit on the horse. Okay, so I'm going to keep that. We'll use that brush maybe one more time. I'll blow dry this. Okay. So, how about I'm going to make another... put another one of these up here so that I can split the video up into the chapters here. Okay, so this is probably not actually background pass number 2, just as the previous ones weren't. I sort of did both background and foreground at the same time. But I'm just putting this here so it's easier for you to jump through the episode. So next what we'll do, I think, is add a little bit more white into the horse, and then a little bit more color, darken the color around the bottom, Okay, so let's do just that. Oops, we want this here. So maybe actually I'm just going to take a little bit of the extra paint off my brush. I'm not even going to bother cleaning the brush. Let's get some more white in here. And I'm also going to put a little bit more matte medium. So basically I'm just putting more white, mixing it into the matte medium and into the color that's already there. I'm a little concerned that I might have added a bit too much white and it might be a little bit opaque. So we'll see here very shortly. What I am going to do though is now kind of shift down to a smaller brush. You know, so I was at this bigger brush. I'm going to go about half the size down, just so I can get a little bit of different type of marks on this on the canvas here. So we'll know here within a couple seconds if this is too light. Actually, not bad, not bad. So it's actually kind of perfect. It's still a little bit transparent, which is what I want. Because I don't want, if I just painted it with just the white directly on here, I would have obliterated all the work I just did. And what's the point of doing that if we're just going to paint it all over, right? It looks like a lot of these brush strokes are, like if we look closely, are kind of vertical brush strokes. That camera is having just a little tricky time focusing, so let's, I'm just gonna want to focus this here. There we go. That's the template for Thursday's epic class, which is a pretty complex one. I've done all of the handouts for, or the outlines for all the upcoming episodes, in case you're wondering. Now, if we were painting this with oil paint, it in some ways would be a lot easier, you know, but at the same time it could also be a little bit more complex, because managing the what's blending and what's not. Here, using oil or acrylic paints gives us actually a level of flexibility, because we can go very slow, let things dry with a blow dryer, or just walk away for a snack or something, and come back and pick up where we left off. So I might want to add a little bit more purple on here later, but so I'm also gonna go, you see how there's like this area is a little bit ambiguous here? I can paint over top a bit of that background, and because it's a little bit transparent, it doesn't completely cover it. So I think that's pretty good for the moment. Let's do the same, but for the area around it. And so I'm going to take this color, mix it into the color I had there for the background previously. And maybe let's... sort of just brushing it back over, things start getting a little bit obscured there. I can like soften up these edges. So some of the paint, actually, let's just go, let's see if I can fix that. Pulling some of that paint off, which I don't like, so let's let that dry. Maybe while all of that's drying, you know what, I think what I need to do is just blow dry all of this here, because I'm pulling some of that paint off. But I'm getting pretty happy. I think, yeah, I just want to do a little bit of darkening down here. Actually, you know what? I think I can... It doesn't look like that's wet. So you know what? Let's just continue here. So I'm going to take that paint. Let's take a little bit more of this purple. Just mix a bit of it, not a lot yet. See, whoa, that's pretty dark, pretty quick, right? A little bit too much, perhaps. So we'll have to just deal with that when we... Okay, just a bit more. Lightening a bit of it up. Maybe darkening it down again. Okay, so I'm gonna do, yeah, let's do a little bit around in the background here. Let's just take some of that white. Still left over. Some of our darker color. Looks like it's almost still exactly what was there, so let's just add it, make it a little bit darker. Okay, now I kind of want to do the same thing but the opposite direction with the lighter color. And just sort of darkening a little bit inside here. It's just all in an effort to make this look a little bit more complicated, right? So it's not just this big blank white horse. We want something that just gives it this, there's something additional going on here. Okay. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. Okay. So I think really at this stage, what I'm ready to do is just do a little bit of outlining and maybe just a little bit of finishing touches here and there. But I'm feeling like I've got the color that I wanted in place and the shape, everything, like, so all the basics are there, right? And it was just using a few of those different, adding a little bit of that matte medium to lighten things, to thin it a little bit so that I could get to this point. Okay. So to do the outlining, we want, basically, it's going to be just our darkest color, but it's not too much darker than some of what we already had here. Right, so it's this purple. I'm going to even paint it right into here. And while that doesn't appear to be too dark, that might even be too dark for our painting. Let's see. In fact, yeah, I'm pretty confident that's going to be a little bit too dark. So just lighten it up a little bit. And I'm going to use this same brush, and I'm just going to use the flat side. So whereas before I was using the wider side to do the lines, now I'm going to use the edge. Let's just get this in place. Camera's confused with this image. It has a hard time focusing, so I gotta put something else there in its place. So I could go a little bit darker. And then, you know, I can use that same darker area under here, but up here it gets a little bit lighter. So we'll just maybe start under here. It's almost like that little bit of like the hair underneath the jaw, right? And then up here. So taking my, as I went, sort of my brush came up off the surface. Now I want something lighter. So I'm just going to now take this paint, maybe even just scrape into the lighter color, whatever I have left. It's too light. Let's get a bit darker again. Not quite dark enough. Too dark. So let's just take a look and just see how that looks from a little bit afar. think I need to do this. Give that this front muscle of the horse just that little bit more definition. It keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, Michael. So that's okay though. I want to get a little bit more backside of that horse. Just some very light, little bit of paint in there. So I'm just sort of taking some of the paint and mixing a little bit directly on the canvas to get more of that nuance of something going on over here. And likewise, so you can see there's like all these little slight changes in the paint. Just give it that little weird amount of complexity that I want. Try to paint a little bit if it's too dark or too light. Just paint it back out. You can just wait for it to dry, or if you're quick with the acrylic, you can just blend it right in. Okay, I think I want just a few more darker areas. I'm gonna take my purple, mix it in here. Okay, I think I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay. I don't know if it's worth $138,000 what I've just done, but okay. So let's do our side-by-side comparison. Take a look at how these two paintings turned out. It actually went by a little bit faster than I was expecting. I don't think the colors are exactly correct, but I think I'm pretty happy. So before we do that, just as a quick reminder to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you like what you've seen, consider joining the Facebook group. Upload your painting to the Facebook group so that we can all see it and celebrate it. Once a month, we go through all of the work that's on there, and I give some feedback, and people are welcome to take it or leave it, but it's all free. If you do want to support the channel, like Lisa did earlier in the Super Chat, there's a number of different ways of doing that, including the PayPal. And if you want to send a good old-fashioned check in the mail, contact me through my email or the Facebook group. Okay. So, how did they turn out side by side? Let's, I think, maybe just back that out just a bit. Yeah, I mean, you know what's, again, he's a master, so you can see that, like, there's what he's done over here with these legs. There's just a little bit more of a hint of something. In fact, I'm just going to see if I can just get something a little bit lighter. Oops, I want it to be a little bit darker. I'm not quite sure. And similarly, here I am painting. You know, this is kind of where a lot of the strength of the horse is, and with a great deal of subtlety, he's managed to capture that, whereas I don't think it quite has come across as much in mine. And the head appears a little bit smaller. Go figure, right? But all in all, I think, you know, I'm not someone who knows really anything about horse anatomy. So, let's just see here. You still have a little bit of that yellow coming through. But, you know, as I look at it, there is something underneath here. I don't know if it's yellow. It probably is maybe a bit of a brown or maybe even a red, like a really thinned out, like magenta or something perhaps under there. I'm not really sure. And his purple's also maybe a little bit darker, maybe just a little bit more on the magenta side. So mine's maybe a little bit too purpley. We could also have done a little bit darkening in on the horse too, just to make the contrast less subtle, or more subtle, sorry. Because usually in these episodes, one of the things that you hear me talk about all the time is bumping up the contrast, adding more value contrast, so the light and dark values contrast more. We're going further and further away, and that creates a friction, and that tension is usually very desirable, where we want a contrast between the foreground and background to really create more depth and space. Anatoliy really sort of plays with our expectations in terms of value, especially in these paintings where the horse, and he did a number, like I think about 14 versions of this horse. The foreground and backgrounds are almost the same value, right? In fact, again, like my contrast is a little bit higher than his, and this is the most, even like his painting is the most contrasty, or has the most contrast of any of these horse paintings in this series that he did, right? Which is one of the reasons why I chose this one, so it wouldn't be too complicated, especially for our beginner painters. But as I said, he really is playing with value contrasts in a way that sort of goes maybe against some of the things I've said in the past. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose today's painting, so that we could really try to work on subtlety of value, transitions. We could use a fairly limited palette, even though I thought we would be using a little bit more color, but I guess we're not going to be doing that. So I'm happy with that. So just before I pack up for the afternoon, I'm just going to do a little bit more work on my J. DeFeo painting here. Add a little bit more of this, all this extra paint that I've got on my canvas or my palette. I'm going to cover this again. So it's a shame I didn't use this on the painting, but at least it's not going to waste. It's not just going down the sink or into the landfill. It's going towards building another painting. And I tell you, I often think, and I'm not the only one, sometimes my palette is nicer than the painting when I'm done a painting session. And here's a way of sort of deliberately creating like a palette for yourself. You don't have to even really think too much about the color as you smear it all over the surface, and you may end up finding you really, really like something like this. Now, her eventually she kind of, it's quite dark, it's quite gray, that the final layers of paint. But anyway, thank you everyone for painting along with me. Yes, Paula, we are done for the night. This was a little bit of a shorter episode. The Tuesday episodes for our beginners are intended to be some of the shorter episodes. Not always turning up that way, but that's the way it is tonight, right? Okay, everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening. No matter where you are on our beautiful planet, there's a reason to be grateful to be alive. Consider supporting some of the organizations in the description below that are giving aid to Ukrainian refugees: Doctors Without Borders, the Red Cross, the Canadian Ukrainian Foundation, etc. And hopefully, if you're watching this video 2 or 3 years from now, you're like, why? What are we even talking about? Hopefully that's the case, and that this horrible situation is long over, and the world is back to normal. Unlikely, but hopefully this is the end and not the beginning of something much worse. Okay, everyone, enjoy the rest of your night, and we will talk to you again very soon. We'll see you on Thursday. Good night, everybody.